Claire, you actually married him. A man who doesn't even own a house? Jason raised his champagne glass and laughed. Several relatives joined him. Claire stood beside Ethan, her new husband, trying not to let the humiliation show on her face. Ethan wore a plain black suit, an inexpensive watch, and the same shoes he'd worn to their courthouse appointment 2 weeks earlier. Jason looked him up and down. Seriously, Claire, what were you thinking? Before she could answer, her father, Richard, leaned back in his chair. She's always been too trusting. Then he looked directly at Ethan. You should be grateful my daughter married beneath her. The room went quiet for half a second, before laughter returned. Claire's eyes filled with anger. Dad, that's enough. Ethan gently touched her arm. It's okay. Richard smirked. Ethan looked at him for several seconds, then smiled. You're right. Richard raised an eyebrow. Ethan leaned closer. You should probably keep that opinion. 3 hours later, the reception was still going when the doors opened. 4 people in tailored suits walked into the room. They didn't look around at the decorations or congratulate the newlyweds. They were searching for someone. One of them spotted Ethan and immediately crossed the room. Mr. Blackwell. Ethan nodded. David. The executive checked his watch. The board is waiting. Jason laughed nervously. Mr. Blackwell? David turned toward him. Yes. Jason looked at Ethan. You mean him? David's expression didn't change. I mean the owner. The room went silent. Claire stared at her husband. Richard slowly lowered his glass. Ethan looked toward the executives, then toward the family that had spent the entire night laughing at him, and for the first time, the smile disappeared from his face. The secret he had spent years protecting was no longer his to keep. Before we go deeper, let us know in the comments where you're watching from. We'd love to hear from you. And don't forget to hit that subscribe button so you never miss any of our upcoming videos. Because what happened inside that wedding hall didn't begin that night. It began years earlier, when Ethan Blackwell decided that if he ever became wealthy, almost nobody would know. He had a reason for that decision. And by the time Claire discovered the truth, the man her family considered a failure had already built an empire that could change their lives with a single signature. Ethan grew up watching his father run a successful manufacturing business. The money was good, but Ethan noticed something that bothered him. Whenever his father's finances were discussed, people's behavior changed. A distant cousin suddenly wanted a favor. An old friend needed a loan. A businessman who had ignored his father for years suddenly became available for dinner. Ethan was young, but he understood the pattern. People didn't always become interested in the person. Sometimes they became interested in what the person could provide. Years later, when Ethan began building his own companies, he decided he would never let his wealth become his introduction. At 29, Ethan purchased a struggling regional logistics company. The business looked unattractive on paper. Its vehicles were old, its management was inefficient, and its debt frightened potential buyers. Ethan saw something others had missed. The company had excellent warehouse locations and long-term distribution contracts. He replaced the management team, renegotiated several agreements, modernized operations, and waited. 3 years later, the company's value had increased several times over. Ethan sold part of his stake and used the money to acquire another struggling company. Then another. Eventually, the businesses were placed beneath a private holding structure called Blackwell Capital Partners. Ethan deliberately stayed out of the spotlight. His executives attended conferences. His lawyers handled public filings. His investment managers negotiated major transactions. His name rarely appeared in headlines. If someone searched for Ethan Blackwell, they would find very little. That was exactly what he wanted. He didn't own a fleet of supercars. He didn't pose beside yachts. He didn't announce every vacation. When he wanted to disappear, he drove an old silver sedan to a quiet apartment and became just another man walking down the street. Then he met Claire. Their first meeting happened outside a grocery store on a rainy afternoon. Claire's car had stalled, and she was standing beside it with her phone in one hand and frustration written across her face. Ethan stopped. Need some help? Claire looked at him skeptically. Do you know anything about cars? Ethan smiled. Enough to get you home. 20 minutes later, the engine started. Claire offered him money. Ethan shook his head. Keep it. She asked his name. Ethan. She expected him to ask for hers. He didn't. He simply walked toward his car and left. Claire couldn't stop thinking about him, not because he had impressed her, but because he hadn't tried. She was accustomed to people noticing her family name. Ethan seemed completely uninterested in it. When they met again, she approached him. Conversation became friendship. Friendship became something deeper. Ethan remembered small things about her. He knew when she was worried. He could tell when she was pretending to be happy. When Claire had a difficult presentation at work, Ethan didn't offer empty encouragement. He asked her what she was afraid would go wrong. She told him. He listened. That was enough. Claire eventually realized she wanted to marry him. When she told her father, Richard's first question wasn't whether Ethan loved her. What does he own? Claire paused. I'm not sure. Richard frowned. What company does he run? I don't know. Where does his family live? I don't know that either. Richard stared at her. Then you don't know the man you're marrying? Claire answered quietly. I know him better than you think. Richard had spent 30 years building Whitmore Development, a respected construction and property company. He believed money wasn't everything, but he believed financial stability mattered. He had watched businesses collapse, marriages break apart, and families lose homes because people ignored financial realities. To him, Ethan was an unknown risk. Richard hired someone to investigate. The report arrived several days later. It was thin. No mansion, no luxury vehicles, no significant properties, no public business profile, no obvious wealth. There was an apartment. There was an old sedan. There were several small business registrations that appeared unrelated to any major fortune. Richard looked at the report and felt vindicated. He took it to Claire. This is the man you're marrying. Claire glanced through the pages. Did you speak to him? No. Then you don't know anything about him. I know enough. Claire closed the folder. No. You know what he owns. Richard replied. That's usually a good place to start. Claire walked away. The wedding continued. Ethan never asked Claire to fight her family for him. He never demanded an apology. He simply told her that whatever happened, he would stand beside her. One evening, Claire finally asked the question she had avoided. How much money do you have? Ethan looked at her. Why? Because everyone keeps talking about it. He smiled. Let them. Claire frowned. That's not an answer. No. Then give me one. Ethan took her hand. I have enough. Claire laughed. You are unbelievably frustrating. He smiled. She didn't know that Ethan had just lied by telling her the smallest possible truth. The wedding arrived on a Saturday in October. Claire walked down the aisle toward Ethan, while Richard watched from the front row. For several minutes, nothing seemed wrong. Ethan's eyes stayed on Claire. When they exchanged vows, his voice shook slightly. Claire noticed. She smiled. Then the reception began. The first joke came from Jason. Ethan, where did you park that antique? Ethan looked at him. My car? Jason laughed. Yeah, outside. I'm surprised it made it here. Several people laughed. Claire frowned. Ethan smiled politely. Later, one of her cousins asked where they were going for their honeymoon. Somewhere quiet, Ethan answered. Jason interrupted. Of course, luxury resorts cost money. Claire looked at him sharply. Ethan said nothing. Richard watched the exchange from across the room. He believed Ethan's silence proved his insecurity. He was wrong. Richard eventually stood for his speech. He began with memories of Claire as a child. For a moment, everyone smiled. Then he looked toward Ethan. Marriage is a serious responsibility. My daughter deserves stability, security, and a man who understands what it means to provide. Claire's smile disappeared. Richard continued. She has been fortunate in life. I hope her husband understands that fortune comes with obligations. Jason raised his glass. To Claire, he said, for finally finding a man who knows how to marry up. Laughter filled the room. Claire stood. Stop. Jason looked surprised. It's a joke. No, Claire said. It's disrespect. She turned toward Ethan. I'm sorry. Ethan stood and took her hand. Let's get some air. Outside, Claire wiped her eyes. I hate that they did this to you. Ethan looked at her. They didn't do it to me. What do you mean? They did it to themselves. Claire didn't understand. His phone rang. Ethan answered. Yes? His expression changed. Move the meeting. He listened. Monday morning. Another pause. No. Everyone. Claire watched him. Bring the North Star file. He ended the call. She asked, who was that? David. Who is David? My CEO. Claire blinked. You have a CEO. Ethan smiled. I told you I manage investments. You said you managed investments. You never said you had a CEO. I have several. Claire stared at him. Ethan laughed. I'll explain after tonight. But there was something he didn't tell her. North Star Industrial was the biggest acquisition Blackwell Capital had considered that year. Richard's company had been pursuing the same deal, and Ethan had personally ordered his executives to reject Richard's latest offer. Not because Richard had insulted him, because Ethan had seen something in the financial records that Richard hadn't. Whitmore Development was carrying too much debt. The North Star acquisition could push the company into serious trouble. Ethan had already decided not to sell. He just hadn't decided whether to tell Claire why. Back inside, the reception continued. At 11:47 p.m., the doors opened. 4 executives walked inside. The first was David Mercer, chief executive of Blackwell Capital Partners. He spotted Ethan. Mr. Blackwell. Richard heard the name. His head turned. David walked toward Ethan. The board is ready. Ethan looked at his watch. Give me 10 minutes. David nodded. Richard stepped closer. Excuse me. David turned. Do I know you? Richard Whitmore. David paused. Yes, I know the name. Richard smiled slightly. You represent Blackwell Capital? Yes. Richard's expression changed. He had spent months trying to arrange a meeting with the company. I've been trying to reach your chairman. David looked toward Ethan. You already have. Richard followed his gaze. His face changed. No. David said nothing. Richard looked at Ethan. No. Ethan stepped forward. Richard. You're Blackwell. Ethan didn't answer. David did. Ethan Blackwell is the controlling owner of Blackwell Capital Partners. Nobody moved. Jason's mouth opened slightly. Patricia stared at her daughter. Claire looked directly at Ethan. How long? Ethan said nothing. How long have you known? Ethan answered softly. Always. Claire shook her head. No. How long have you known I was going to marry you without telling me? Ethan looked at her. I never knew that. Then why hide it? His answer came quietly. Because I wanted one person to love me without knowing what I owned. Claire's eyes filled with tears. You thought I was like them? No. Then why? Ethan swallowed. Because I've been wrong before. The room went silent. Richard stepped forward. How much are you worth? Ethan looked at him. That doesn't matter. Richard's voice hardened. How much? David answered. His personal holdings crossed $1 billion several years ago. Jason slowly sat down. Claire closed her eyes. The room that had been laughing earlier was now completely silent. Nobody asked Ethan about his old car anymore. Nobody mentioned his apartment. Nobody joked about his job. Instead, people started looking at him differently. And Ethan hated it, because this was exactly what he had been trying to prevent. Claire walked outside. Ethan followed. She stood beneath the lights of the parking lot. You're a billionaire! Yes. You own Blackwell Capital. Yes. You own all those companies. Not all of them. She looked at him. Ethan. He smiled weakly. A lot of them. Claire laughed through her tears. I don't even know whether I should hug you or yell at you. You can do both. She punched him lightly in the arm, then hugged him. For a few seconds, neither spoke. Finally, Claire whispered, You should have trusted me. Ethan closed his eyes. I know. Inside the reception hall, Richard was having a completely different realization. He remembered the North Star acquisition. He remembered every rejected offer. He remembered every unanswered request for a meeting. Then he remembered the man standing beside his daughter. The pieces came together. He had been negotiating with Ethan without knowing it. The next morning, Richard went to Blackwell Capital. The building was enormous, but Ethan's office was surprisingly simple. Richard entered. Ethan stood beside the window. Richard closed the door. North Star. Ethan turned. My company has been trying to buy it for 6 months. I know. You rejected us. Yes. Why? Ethan placed a folder on the desk. Because you can't afford it. Richard's face hardened. We can. Ethan opened the folder. Inside were financial projections. Richard looked at them. His expression changed. You reviewed our books. Public information. You knew. Yes. Richard sat down. For the first time, his confidence disappeared. Ethan pointed to several figures. Your debt increased for 3 consecutive quarters. 2 of your projects are over budget. Your commercial division is carrying losses. If you purchase North Star now, you could put the entire company under pressure. Richard stared at the documents. You could have bought us. Yes. You could have destroyed us. Yes. Why didn't you? Ethan looked at him. Because you're Claire's father. Richard had no answer. Then Ethan said something unexpected. I can help you restructure the company. Richard looked up. You'd help me. I'm not offering you a gift. Richard waited. I'm offering you a chance to fix what isn't working. Richard sat quietly. Then he said the words he had refused to say at the wedding. I was wrong about you. Ethan nodded. Richard continued. I thought money told me what kind of man you were. Ethan replied. You weren't the only one. Richard looked at him. I owe you an apology. You owe Claire one. Richard lowered his head. That afternoon, Richard went to see his daughter. He didn't make excuses. He didn't mention Ethan's fortune. He simply said, I treated your husband badly. Claire looked at him. Yes. Richard nodded. I was wrong. She smiled faintly. That means more than you know. The family didn't transform overnight. Jason was embarrassed for months. Patricia struggled with the fact that she had believed the same things Richard had. But eventually, the jokes stopped. The requests for business favors stopped. And slowly, people began treating Ethan like the person he had always been. Claire's relationship with Ethan changed too. She had forgiven him, but she made one thing clear. No more secrets. Ethan smiled. No more secrets. She looked at him. Completely. Completely. What about how much money you have? He laughed. You really want to know? No. Good. She smiled. Months later, Ethan and Claire returned to the wedding venue. The room was empty. Claire looked toward the table where Jason had raised his glass. Do you remember what my father said? Ethan smiled. I remember. You told him to keep that opinion. I did. Why? Ethan looked at her. Because I knew I couldn't change his mind, Claire asked. And now? Now I don't need to. They stood quietly for a moment. Claire took his hand. Would you have married me if I had been poor? Ethan looked at her. I already answered that. No, you didn't. He smiled. Yes, I did. She waited. Ethan squeezed her hand. I didn't marry your family. Claire smiled. I know. I didn't marry your money. I know. I married you. Claire leaned against him. Outside, people passed through the parking lot without noticing them. No cameras, no reporters, no luxury cars surrounding them. Just 2 people standing together. And that was exactly how Ethan wanted it. The wedding had begun with a room full of people deciding what a man was worth by looking at his clothes, his car, and his bank account. It ended with those same people realizing they had never really known him. But the most important part wasn't that Ethan had billions. It was that Claire had chosen him before she knew any of it. The people who mocked him had believed they were looking at a man with nothing. Claire had looked at the same man and seen everything that mattered to her. And when the truth finally came out, she didn't fall in love with a billionaire. She discovered that the man she already loved happened to be one. So think about that wedding for a moment. If you had been sitting at Richard's table, would you have laughed when Jason made that first joke? Would you have assumed Ethan was unsuccessful because of his old car? Would you have believed Richard when he said Claire had married beneath her? Or would you have noticed what Claire noticed long before anyone else? The way Ethan listened, the way he treated people when there was nothing to gain, the way he remained calm when everyone else wanted him to react. Because sometimes the most important information about a person isn't what they own. It's how they behave when they believe nobody important is watching. And Ethan had been watching. He had seen who respected him. He had seen who mocked him. He had seen who changed when they learned the truth. And in the end, he didn't need revenge. He simply allowed everyone to reveal themselves. If you were Claire, would you have married Ethan while believing he was broke? And if you were Ethan, would you have revealed your billionaire identity before the wedding? Or would you have kept it private until you knew who truly loved you? Tell us your answer in the comments. And if you enjoyed this story, subscribe for more stories where the person everyone underestimates turns out to be the one nobody should have underestimated.